All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am excited, very much ready to talk Denver Nuggets and the trade deadline. Trade deadline a little bit. The trade deadline is in 10 days from this podcast is being recorded on Monday, January 27th, and I feel like I have a pretty good idea of who the Nuggets are, and people disagree with me. People definitely disagree with me, and I'm going to talk about my process here, what Denver can do. I'm going to share some names, and then later in this podcast, we will do Nuggets versus Chicago Bulls preview for tonight. Should be fun. Always appreciate it. Always appreciate folks like Boyan in the comments, others there too. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Boyan says, by the way, thank you for great coverage and perspectives on the Denver Nuggets. I truly enjoy your show. Thank you, Boyan. Always nice to have the regulars in the comments. That makes it all the much better. And it shows that what we're doing here is correct. And so I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Woke up this morning and I had rolled my ankle in the middle of the night. So that's like the most growing older kind of thing that I could possibly say. I have no idea what happened between last night and this morning, but I am in copious amounts of pain. We'll get through it. It'll be fine. I'm not worried too much about it for this particular show. But always great when you get to talk about it from a sitting at home and you get to talk about the road game then. Noam Chomsky says, wait until you throw out your back from sneezing. Oh, brother, you don't even know. I've already done this way too many times. It's about as bad as it gets. Yeah, still tired, still working through it, but I appreciate you guys bearing with me. We'll get into all of the talk in just a second, but really quickly, this podcast, as you know, it's brought to you by the good folks over at BetOnline, number one choice for everything sports betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the Super Bowl now, the NBA, college basketball, and more. They are your number one sports betting source for the new year. BetOnline has you covered for every game and every play. Make sure to check them out. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. What's up, CT? Good to see you, my guy. Always happy that you're hanging out in the chat. We'll do a show soon. Now this is, I think, this will go in three segments. We're going to talk first, are the Nuggets good enough? That is the most important thing here as we approach the NBA trade deadline, because everybody has different perspectives on whether the Nuggets need to do something, whether they shouldn't do something, whether they should avoid it, things like that. Gordon, good friend Gordon Gross says it's too early on a Monday for this, and I totally understand that too. But hey, we got to talk about it because there's only 10 days left before the trade deadline. It's the last sort of bastion between the Nuggets and figuring out what they need to do for this NBA season and whether they're good enough for this NBA year. And I feel like I have a different perspective from a lot of people. Looking at various rankings here, the Nuggets are 9th in team EPM, smoothed over the course of the last 7 games or so. 5th in offense, 20th in defense. Yes, they've been dealing with some injuries for sure, but they're dealing with fewer injuries now. And Aaron Gordon is getting back into the starting lineup over the course of these next few games, I would guess. And I tend to think that the Nuggets are now they're about to see exactly how good they are. Russell Westbrook has been a pleasant surprise for this team. He's been way better, I think, than a lot of people expected and more consistent. Brought them to a higher level at various points. Peyton Watson initially filled in really nicely for Aaron Gordon. He has some moments where he really shows that he can play a larger role, but he is also a young guy. And still prone to large inconsistencies. Julian Strother, same thing, of course. Christian Brown, I think, is a little bit more consistent than those two. His level is still a little bit lower at times than what Peyton Watson would bring, and maybe the overall level of scoring and threat that Julian Strother would bring. But Christian, I think, has really penciled himself in as a starter quality player. Like, even if it's a low quality starter, still starter quality. And then Murray has bounced back for sure. There's like he's a lot more consistent, I would say. Jokic, is the best player in the world. Is that good enough? Is it good enough to just be at that level? Can the Nuggets be, I don't know, the 5th or 6th best team in the NBA from a strength standpoint and still win a title? Yeah, I think given parity in the NBA and given where all of these teams are, the Nuggets are only going to have to face one Eastern Conference team if they were to make it to the NBA Finals. They'll probably have to get through the Thunder. And you guys know how I feel about the OKC Thunder and how dangerous they are. Can Denver win that series? Sure. I don't give Denver better than 50-50 odds to win that series. Why would I? The way that the Thunder have played, they haven't even been healthy for this entire time. So you got to be proactive, in my opinion. You have to be looking at different ways that you can improve. And I look at what Denver has really provided over the course of these last few weeks and the way that they have looked. And I just continue to look at the defense and say, yeah, they're probably still not good enough. The question that people have to ask themselves is if Aaron Gordon just starts again, if he's just in the lineup, if he's playing 30, 35 minutes per game in the playoffs as opposed to the 20 minutes per game that he's averaged over his last 7 since coming back from the injury, how much does that by itself improve Denver's defense? Because they've been about like 18th to 20th over the course of these last, like over the course of January. Let me pull up the actual numbers so I'm not just talking. Like let me see if I can get that up so that I can have the right frame of perspective. In the month of January, the Denver Nuggets have the 8th best defensive rating so far. They're 10-4. So over January, they've been pretty good. They looked horrible against the Timberwolves, though. And I continue to look at elite teams in the NBA and Denver's performance against them and wonder, okay, is Denver able to really lock in on the defensive end against those particular teams, whether it's Boston, Cleveland, New York? Like, these are the examples that we've been given. But there's not as many of those kinds of elite offenses in the Western Conference, I'll say. Like, OKC is dangerous, but they're not an elite offense. Dallas is an elite offense, and that one I think would be scary for Denver. Memphis is, I think they're good. I don't think they're elite in terms of what their actual upper level tier can be. And then Houston is not an elite offense. Denver should be able to match up with them reasonably well, and if they got into a playoff series with them, Denver should win. But I also kind of turn back to, you know how it felt last year when Denver, if you were to say, okay, Denver is going to be in a series with a team that is worse than them, you never felt like Denver would lose in that situation, ever. Minnesota was in the same tier as Denver, and they matched up better against Denver, so that's why they won. I think that they are still in the same tier, or maybe slightly worse, but the Nuggets, I think, are more vulnerable this season because they are A, worse team, and B, just a little bit more volatile than they have been in previous years. The loss of KCP opens up the door for a lack of consistency, especially on the wing, especially with the shooting, especially with the defense. Like, those are the things that you have to worry about. And I'm not sure that Denver solidified that. Can they reach the same high level? Yeah. And I think we've seen that with Westbrook, especially. The Nuggets can still have high offensive ratings, high net ratings with some of the mix of players that they have. It's just about hitting that level at the same time and making sure that everybody's pushing the same direction against the top 4 teams in each conference. So the top 4 teams in the East, the top 3 teams in the West outside of Denver. Denver's 2-7 so far this season. They play another 9 games against those top teams, and I'm very curious to see how they fare in those situations. But they only play 1 more of those games before the trade deadline, so I can really only go off of what we've seen. I don't know if Denver's level reaches those top teams. And that's not the only way to determine it. But does anybody really, can you say, based off of the way that Denver's played against the Cavs or the Knicks or the Thunder or the Houston Rockets or the Memphis Grizzlies? Now, some of those have been without Jokic. Now, actually, a fair amount of those have been without Jokic. So if you play those with Jokic and you split them instead, then maybe Denver's record against those teams looks a lot better. But I still am just a little bit concerned about Denver's ability to reach that high level on a consistent basis. And people will call me a worrywart or a hater or whatever. I'm just talking about what I'm seeing. I'm talking about the level of defense that Denver can tap into. And the other factor, of course, is that if Denver plays guys like Peyton Watson, Russell Westbrook, Aaron Gordon, even Christian Brown, if they play their top defenders more, and if they play them more together, Denver's offense is going to suffer, and they're going to go through droughts like they had last year in the playoffs against Minnesota, where they just can't score. And if it's all on Jokic and it's all on Murray, and then you don't have other guys that you can really trust on a consistent basis, that is very scary. So does Denver need higher level defenders that can also shoot? That'd be great. Those guys are hard to get, though. And so I don't know whether Denver's good enough. I talked about this with my brother over the weekend. He gave Denver a 7% chance of winning the title at this current moment in time. And I came out to about 5%, 6%. Now, it's a non-zero chance, and any team that has a non-zero chance, or a non-1% chance, better than that, should be going for it, should be trying to use their resources to get better. But I don't know if they will, and I don't know if they have the resources to actually make it happen. So I'm curious what everybody else here thinks. Are the Nuggets good enough? Are they good enough to warrant selling some of the assets off that they have accumulated, like the 2031 first-round pick, and trying to turn that into an upgrade in the rotation? I don't know what the answer is. Is Denver good enough to even warrant doing that this year? Is it the right time to use that? Maybe the right time is next season when Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther are all a year older, and maybe the Nuggets are just a little bit healthier. But let's be honest. Are Murray, Porter, Gordon going to get healthier next season? I don't know. That seems kind of far-fetched to me. And Jokic is going to be another year older. Taking advantage of the time where he's so clearly the best player in the world is probably the right call. But I just don't know if that's something that the Nuggets will be able or willing to do. So this is why the trade deadline is so important. Last year, if you remember, I was very much on the idea that Denver was missing the mark by not adding to their rotation. And I got made fun of by several people that I respect. And then Denver lost a 20-point lead in Game 7 because they didn't have enough. And it's not me crowing about being right. It's just about the fact that, hey, maybe you might be wrong. And maybe the preconceived notions that the team is good enough isn't good enough. Maybe you have to know that it's good enough. And I just don't know right now. So, going to be interesting to see how they handle this. When we come back, I'm going to share some actual names. I don't have the greatest list here, but I'm going to share some names that I came up with in looking at Spot Track and and looking at some contracts that the Nuggets might be able to acquire. When we come back, we're going to look at some NBA trade targets here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. You never want to over-index on one matchup, but it did feel like the matchup that Denver had over the weekend against the Minnesota Timberwolves did mean something, or at least it meant something to me. Denver was, of course, I haven't talked about that game on this platform. I talked about it briefly on Locked On last night, so if you're interested, go check that episode out. I thought that one was good with Matt. But I tend to think that the Nuggets, they probably have to shift something. And I'm sort of open to the idea of Denver changing things up a bit. Not sure how strong that is and what that actually means. Does it mean breaking up the core four? Does it mean just adding another rotation player? I don't know. What I do know is that Denver hasn't made a serious midseason acquisition in the last few years. And the last time they did make a serious acquisition, they got Aaron Gordon, and that ultimately led to some pretty good things. So does Denver have the flexibility to be able to do it? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Boyan asks, any update on Vlatko? No, we haven't heard much of anything on Vlatko. The way that the Nuggets were talking about it when the injury did happen, it happened back in mid-November. The way that they were talking about it, it wasn't a good sign that he would be able to come back and help. It would be shocking to me if he was back and helpful in the playoffs. Like, just the ability to get back to that level. He was already coming back from an injury, multiple knee injuries. It's hard for me to count on Vlatko at this point. And that's like no offense to him at all. It's just like anybody in that situation with the injuries that they have suffered. I can't, like, that can't be the only midseason acquisition that the Nuggets have, you know? Like, that wouldn't be enough to me. Maybe he ultimately does help, but it would be just shocking to me. Jimenez says, one name you've said in the past that I like is Amir Coffey to fill in the Julian Strawther role, who can play shooting guard and small forward. I would like it too. The problem is that the Clippers are good enough now that they are never going to give him up. They're never going to give up a value contract like that. I'd be shocked if they did. They are competing with the Nuggets to try to advance in the Western Conference. And if they are competing with Denver, it's just very unlikely that they would be willing to give up somebody like Amir Coffey. And so that is actually a pretty good pivot to how do you figure out who's available and who's not in the NBA? Like, if you're a fan, if you're on the outside looking in, let me give you a window into my perspective here. Any team that has aspirations of winning this season, they are very unlikely to give up their role players. Unless you are unless you're giving them back something of serious value, which Denver wouldn't be at that point. Unless you're giving them back a winning player and you're just kind of swapping names, then that's the only reason I could think of that somebody like an Amir Coffey could be available if the Nuggets were giving up. Like, let's say Dario Saric was playing well this year. Like, that's one that I would consider if I were the Clippers, saying, hey, another backup big man option, somebody that could give us some versatility. That would be the idea. But Dario's not playing well, so they would never really consider doing that. And Amir Coffey probably gives them a little bit more utility than somebody like Dario Saric. So you look at some of the other names, you look at some of the teams that are not winning right now, that don't really consider winning to be in their best interest. And I'm looking at the Utahs, the New Orleans, the Portlands, even the San Antonios at some point, and then a whole slew of Eastern Conference teams that are pretty bad. like Washington and even Chicago. There's a lot of names that you can go to. And then you look at the flexibility that the Nuggets have. Can Denver add anybody that's over $20 million a year? No. And so I've seen a name like Cam Johnson pop up. Koei Kakaro says Strother, Dario plus Zeke for Cam Johnson, if only it were that simple. The problem is that isn't enough. That isn't enough from a salary perspective for Denver to make it happen. One of the rules that they have in the CBA this year is that they have to match that money 100% because they are over the first apron. If Denver wasn't over the first apron, then they'd be able to make it work, but they're not. So they have to, like, the most amount of money that any one player could probably make this year that would make sense to trade for is about $17 million. And Cam Johnson just makes more than that. So Noam Chomsky says it right before, Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson and another 1 to 2 players is the way to go. That would be great if the Nets actually thought that was a good idea. And I don't think they do. I don't think there's any reason for them to trade for Michael Porter when if they could trade for Cam Johnson and turn him into multiple first-round picks or a first-round pick and a young prospect, like Denver can't really do that. And Michael Porter kind of has them going backwards. Michael Porter's more of a winning player, somebody that you acquire when you're trying to win games. And so the Nets aren't trying to win games. They're trying to tank. They're trying to get the best possible pick that they can. So I'd be shocked if they'd be interested in Michael Porter, personally. There are other names. Noam Chomsky says Matisse Thybulle. He's on the list. Says Javonte Green. He's on the list. There's a couple of other names here that make some sense. And there's some like that's an interesting one because it's such a small contract, $2 million, that Denver could absolutely make that work. And would he provide enough defense that it makes some sense to add him to the rotation? Sure. Or at least a different change of perspective. So I'm curious to see what other names other people have. But I'm going to share with you a list of mid-level contracts that the Nuggets could trade for if they so chose. By the way, Mac McClung just committed to the slam dunk contest while we were doing this. I was thinking about that. It's just the dumbest contest at this point. You have Mac McClung, Steph Castle, Mataz Buzelis, who the Nuggets are going to see later today. And then there's another guy who's just like the draw is just not there. Nobody gives a darn about that contest at all. And Andre Jackson Jr., that's right. What the hell? What are we doing here, man? This is why when everybody said take the All-Star game seriously, it's just complete and utter BS. The players are not going to take All-Star weekend seriously. This is the perfect reason. This is the perfect explanation. They're not going to play hard in the All-Star game. I'm getting off track here, but good Lord. Mac McClung, Andre Jackson Jr., Mataz Buzelis, and Steph Castle. Yikes. Okay. Trade names. Off the table names that I would love if I were the Nuggets: Herb Jones, Denny Avdia. Those are probably not available, just to be clear. And Denver probably doesn't even have the assets to really get in on those names. Other names that you start to look at for teams that are not good and could potentially sell off their veterans. Jordan Clarkson of the Utah Jazz. How much does he fit for Denver? Not a ton, given that he's more of an offensive-focused player and Denver needs defense. Could he space the floor for Denver? Yes. Is that good enough? I don't know. It's an option. Kelly Olynyk. This is another option that if he was playing better and playing more on a consistent basis, then maybe you could really point to that and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not sure if it's still a good idea. Matt and I have talked about this before. Is he the right name for Denver right now? I don't know. Can he help Denver play better offensively in the playoffs? Sure. Do they need that? Maybe sometimes in the non-Jokic minutes. Like, I could see an Aaron Gordon, Kelly Olynyk front court working pretty well. Is that good enough? I don't know. Caleb or Cody Martin, the two Martin twins, I think would be interesting for Denver. Caleb is on Philly right now, and I think they're in a situation where they have to make a decision. Are they going to keep around their vets and try to go for the playoffs, or are they going to try to recoup some of the assets that they lost and then make another swing at it this offseason? They have to figure out whether this season is lost for themselves or not. It's lost for the Charlotte Hornets, so they could absolutely trade Cody Martin, and Denver could absolutely, like, they have the money to be able to send there. Kelly Oubre, same conversation as Caleb Martin. Both of those guys would help Denver defensively a little bit. Is it enough? Can Denver actually add those guys to their rotation without giving up too much? I don't know. Him says Hornets fans want Cody gone. LOL. Probably not a good sign that he would be good for Denver. So, but that's kind of where the conversation is at right now. The names that I'm going to be able to throw out here are not super awesome. So, trying to figure it out. Mike Weisberg says Philly won't tank. They own their own pick, or they don't own their own pick. So Philly probably stays with their vets. It is a top 6 protected pick. Top 6 protected. So if they get under 6, or hypothetically they get into the lotto and then can keep their pick and make it top 4, then they'd want to keep it. Absolutely. And the only way to do that is to increase the odds on their pick. So I'm not sure whether they would like it to convey or not. That's a tough call, tough question. And you said getting under 6 at this stage is pretty tough. Absolutely. Trying to figure out what they can do and how far away they are would be tough. Actually, let's go to Tankathon. Where are they at now? They're at 8. Like, they're not that far off. And the only thing, like, they're only going to get odds. So, like, it's not that crazy. But they're 17-27, and Portland is 17-29. That's 7. So could they get into 7? Sure. So maybe they do try to do it. I don't know. That's a tough place for them to be. Some other names. Says Josh Green in the comments. That's another one that I think would be interesting. I'm not sure that he does enough to really justify it. Like, would you rather play Josh Green or Julian Strawther if you're a Nuggets fan? You'd want to play Julian Strawther just to see if he's the guy that can be somebody that they play going forward. But maybe it's not a choice between those two. Maybe you can play both. I don't know. But probably not. Just thinking about the logistics of how a playoff rotation works. Matisse Thybulle was mentioned. Luke Kennard is another name that I'll throw out there. Memphis has been trying to make an upgrade, and is there a possibility that the Nuggets could get in on that as a third team? They get Luke Kennard in the third deal and then get the spacing, the perimeter shooting that they would so desperately desire. I don't know if that's good enough. Like, they probably need a little bit more forward shooting as opposed to the guard shooting. So that's why guys like Jordan Clarkson and Luke Kennard aren't as appealing. But, and like you could throw Buddy Hield into that situation as well, because Buddy's probably not big enough to be a decent defender against bigger guys. So, like, is it good? I don't know. Jared Vanderbilt on the Lakers, they're probably not going to trade with the Nuggets. But if that's a third team, like a 3-team deal, then maybe there's something there in terms of getting back another front court option. Chris Boucher is a name that's been rumored to the Nuggets already. He would be, of course, I think, pretty helpful in terms of Denver's versatility and their front court spacing and the ability to protect the rim a little bit. The Nuggets, of course, need somebody else that can protect the rim a little bit. PJ Tucker hasn't played at all. I don't think Nuggets fans are super excited about the idea of PJ Tucker, and frankly, neither am I. So I would probably stay away from him, just not athletic enough at this point to not good enough offensively. Larry Nance Jr., that's a name in Atlanta that they might be willing to explore. They're probably going to trade Clint Capella, or will at least have those conversations to open up the door for Onyeka Okongwu. I'm not sure what that looks like for them, but potentially another 3-team deal situation. Rashawn Holmes probably isn't good enough for Denver in the front court to warrant this kind of conversation, but Robert Williams is. He'd be another guy that could potentially protect the rim for Denver in a playoff series. Plays with the Blazers right now, not playing a lot. Jonas Valanciunas would give Denver a front court scorer, kind of going the other direction as opposed to the defense. Maybe Denver needs 48 minutes of post scoring. Maybe that's something that they could do and kind of counteract the rest of the league, but they're not super versatile at that point. So that's a tough one. I'm not sure that that's the direction I would go. Jock Landale, Kevon Looney, another couple of bigs that maybe they become available at various points. Landale's, of course, with Houston, and so they're probably not looking to make a bunch of trades. But like, let's say they want to kind of reroute some options on different players. Maybe Landale's the guy that kind of gets shifted for that reason. And then Steven Adams is another one. His contract is probably too high, but actually no, he's in the 12 million range. So maybe he's an option that, like, if he came to Denver, how fun would that be if you're a Nuggets fan, and if you're a Russell Westbrook fan especially? Like, Steven Adams would be an interesting name, but I don't think the Rockets are really looking to give him up. So those are the names that I came up with. If you can come up with some other ones, then great. Kevin Huerter from Jimenez. Too large of a contract, probably. I think he's in the 16, 17 million range. And just the way that works, I like the way that they would have to do that deal. It's probably Zeke Naji, Dario Saric, and Julian Strawther for Kevin Huerter. I'm not sure the Kings or the Nuggets would be super happy with that deal. And then Gordon, thoughts on Ayo Dosunmu? He's at least gettable, and Denver needs another guard defender. He'd be great, man. Like, he would be great. Denver, I think, would be pretty happy if he was in Denver's rotation. Can they actually get him? I don't know. But it is funny. Every time I look at Chicago, I'm like, wow, they're starting Josh Giddey and Zach LaVine, and now they're starting Lonzo Ball. And Ayo Dosunmu's coming off the bench. Like, why does Ayo Dosunmu keep coming off the bench for them? Like, he'd be a great bench piece for Denver. That would be awesome. So, like, if they could get Ayo Dosunmu, then that'd be awesome. I don't think it's possible, but would you throw your, like, Zeke Naji in a 2031 first-round pick, like, for Ayo Dosunmu? I think everybody here would. Like, that'd be sick. But Chicago's probably not going to want the Zeke contract. Maybe they are more interested in somebody like Dario Saric because of the expiring money. Yeah, I think that's where I would point to. The last conversation that I'll have, last one here, the Zach LaVine, Jimmy Butler dynamic. Like, I don't think Denver's going to get involved on that. There was a rumor, I think, that came out earlier today that Phoenix could potentially get in on the Zach LaVine business. That would be interesting for them. It doesn't really change how I feel about Denver facing Phoenix in a matchup. Like, Denver's probably fine. But could Denver replace Michael Porter with either Zach LaVine or Jimmy Butler? And is that the need that they have? Like, those are the only guys that I could really see them replacing one of their core four guys for. And I just don't know if that's the right call or not. I don't know if the Nuggets would consider that or not. But Butler is kind of a toxic piece right now, and he's more talented, I think, than a lot of people realize with the way that he's played lately. But I don't know if I want to get into the Jimmy Butler business if I'm the Nuggets. With Zach LaVine, like I think he's really good. And so it's one of the reasons why I've kind of lobbied for him over the course of these last few weeks, last few months even. Like he's good. Is he the right player for Denver? I don't know. But I think he's a really good player and probably makes Denver better. How much better, I think, remains to be seen, but their offense would be effectively unstoppable at that point. So who knows? I don't think that Denver's getting involved for either of those guys at this point, which, like, it is what it is. But there is still a possibility that it could happen. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to chat about this Nuggets Bulls game that's coming up tonight. Hey, Zach LaVine's on the docket. We'll be right back here on Pickaxe and Roll. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you are familiar with my writing at milehighsports.com, you'll know that I put out the what to watch for pieces before every game, or at least I try to. If there's a back-to-back, sometimes I don't get to that one because there's just too much to do. But for today, I wrote what to watch for against between the Denver Nuggets and Chicago Bulls. The number of the day in that article was 2, by the way. And I mentioned that in this podcast before. Denver is 2-7 against the top 4 seeds in each conference. Denver's, of course, 4, so it's the top 3 seeds in the West, top 4 seeds in the East. They're 0-2 versus Cleveland, 0-1 versus each of Boston and New York. They haven't played the Bucks yet, who are, by the way, up to 4th. The Eastern Conference is a joke. 1-1 versus the OKC Thunder, 0-1 versus Houston, 1-1 versus Memphis, both of those matchups without Jokic. Denver has missed a fair amount of those matchups with Jokic, so it's hard for me to just say, oh yeah, Denver's 2-7 versus top 4 teams in each conference, therefore they will not win a championship. But I don't know how much better they would be with Jokic in each of those matchups. They'd be better, of course. They'd probably win at least one of them. Would they win that much more? Who knows? But that's where I'm kind of at with it, is that Denver, they still need to prove some of their tough stuff. Chicago's not a tough team. They are a pretty easy team, actually, to score against and to play against, I think. They're one of those teams that has plenty of options that Denver can attack on the offensive end. Nikola Vucevic being one of them. And then the important matchup for tonight will be Jokic versus Vucevic. Pretty shocking there. I think that Vooch could have a big game against Denver, but I also think Joker could be in line for a massive game. Like kind of a, hey, sorry about what happened against Minnesota. Let me just take it out against Chicago kind of game. 30-20-10. Let's predict a 30-20-10 game tonight. I think that is very possible. But the real thing that I'm in, like, Zach LaVine, of course, is on this team. I tend to think this could be a showcase game for him in trying to want to play for the Denver Nuggets, but it has come out that he would like to stay with Chicago. I'm not sure if that's actually true. That seems like posturing to me. Like, it seems like, hey, he could actually stay here. We actually really like him. We actually really want him, and he actually really loves it here. So if you're going to make an offer, it actually better be a serious offer. That to me seems like posturing. So we'll see whether that actually happens or not, but I tend to think that if Chicago could trade him, they probably would. But does that mean that his last couple weeks with the Bulls are this week and maybe next week? We'll see. I think that he could score 30 tonight against the Nuggets. It's kind of similar to the Anthony Edwards situation. The Nuggets don't really have anybody that matches up great with him, and they don't have the defense that can hold up wholesale against him. So could it be 30 points, 5 assists, something like that for Zach LaVine tonight? maybe. And then if Nikola Vucevic adds 20 to 25, then you've got a game on your hands, and you have to figure out, okay, are the rest of the Chicago Bulls going to shoot enough and score enough that they could actually make this a game? It's a good question. I think Jamal Murray is in line for a pretty good game. He should be very like dynamic in this one. Lonzo Ball is a solid defender, but he's still coming back from injury. Ayo Dosunmu is a good defender, but he's coming off the bench for them, so I'm not sure how much he and Murray are actually going to match up with the starters. And that's about it. Dalen Terry is the other kind of defender on their team. Could Levine guard Murray a little bit? I guess, but not really. So I think that Murray's in line for about a 25-point game. If I were the Nuggets, that would be my expectation for him. And so I would expect him and Joker to play pretty well, just like I would expect Levine and Vucevic to play pretty well. The real question will be how many runouts Denver gets, how many opportunities that they get in the half court with those other guys attacking Vucevic, attacking some of the wings. It just wouldn't surprise me if Christian Brown, Russell Westbrook, they get out in fast break in a lot of these situations and are just relentless. Could this be a Julian Strawther game? Sure, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But the one thing outside of those things that I'm looking at, when is Aaron Gordon going to get back to starting? This is an interesting one. It may not be a this game kind of question, but the Nuggets are definitely on the clock with this. I think that Aaron Gordon has sort of expressed enough desire to get off of the bench and get back into the starting lineup that it's probably going to happen relatively soon. He's still probably not fully healthy, in which case you want to be patient. You want to do what you need to do in order to kind of let him get back to that full strength. And you don't want to be in a situation where he re-aggravates the calf injury again. Like, that would be horrible. So, like, you need Aaron. You need him at the peak level in the playoffs, and whatever helps him get there is great. But he also sounds kind of frustrated about coming off the bench consistently. So when will the Nuggets make that change? Are they going to make it on the road? Are they going to make it at home? If they make it on the road, are they going to make it on this trip? And then who goes to the bench? It's probably going to be Russell Westbrook. But I think the way that Russ has played and the way that the Nuggets play with Russ and Joker out there is a pretty strong indicator that maybe you should probably keep him out there too. So I don't know what the answer is. Christian Brown started every game that he's played. Michael Porter started every game that he's played. Are those guys safe? Maybe. I don't know. I threw out this possibility on Locked On last night that maybe the best call for Denver is to go with 3 guards, Aaron Gordon and Jokic, as opposed to 3 guards, Michael Porter and Jokic. Aaron Gordon, of course, providing a little bit more defensive layers. The Michael Porter comes off the bench as a 6-man spark, kind of like what DeAndre Hunter is doing for Atlanta. That's probably not good enough. He probably was going to want to start, obviously, and probably deserves to start. He's too good to come off the bench. But it's a fascinating question. What is the best thing for the Denver Nuggets? I don't know. So we've got plenty of questions to answer for the Nuggets. And I wonder if some of those answers come today. I wonder if some of them come on the rest of this road trip. I don't have a good answer for people. Right now, it feels like Denver has 6 starters, and they don't all fit together that well, and they're trying to come up with something that makes sense, but the way that Denver started the season is probably the best way for them to approach it. But did Russell Westbrook earn the right to kind of break into that starting lineup? Of course. So it's a tough place to be. I posed this as a potential solution on Locked On last night. I think that the right call for Denver is to bench Westbrook again and then to bring him in pretty soon in each quarter. Like, have him come off the bench at about the 7-minute mark of each quarter and play about 28 minutes total, from 7 minutes at the end of the first quarter to 0, and then to go back to the bench at the beginning of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter. And then that way he plays multiple stints, plays pretty high energy basketball, things like that. I don't know if that's the right call, but it's kind of an inverse starter position. And he may not be the guy to start, but he also could be the guy to close, depending on how it goes. So I'm curious. I am curious to see what it looks like and what Denver decides to do. D's Nuts says Porter has too much gravity and you will notice if you don't start him. Yeah, that's a very fair point, and it's absolutely one that you have to worry about for Denver. The thing is that they have Jokic and they have Murray and they have Christian Brown cutting relentlessly and Russell Westbrook playing well on that end, setting the table for everybody. Aaron Gordon shot 42% from three this year. He's shooting enough. Is the gravity that Porter has, does that overcompensate for that? Or is that still valuable enough that it makes sense to have him out there? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think every logical brain in my body says you probably need to start Porter, but I also have looked at the way that he's played when Denver faces physical teams and say, not sure that that's the way that they should go when the playoffs roll around. So curious to see what happens. I think Denver probably wins. I think they bounce back. I think they figure it out, but we'll see. We'll see how they approach this one. This one's secretly kind of important because they play New York next, and you never want to be on a 3-game losing streak. Like, New York is going to be a tough one. So will Denver be able to win that one? Probably not. So you probably got to win this one so you could still have a positive road trip. We'll see what happens. All right. Everybody, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BETONLINE. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. This podcast went a little long. Hope you enjoyed. Hope everybody appreciates it. I'll be back tomorrow, a recap of Chicago, and maybe I'll get some response from everybody on my particular thoughts on the trades. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button on the way out. Would always appreciate it. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.